everyone, welcome back to Leadership Bytes, your monthly dose of intentional leadership. I'm Claire.
And I'm Raymond. And today we are talking about something that every leader wants to master, and that is the ability to lead across generation.
It's no longer about one size fits all leadership. And with four, sometimes five generations in the workplace, leaders need to new strategies to connect, communicate, and collaborate. In this episode, what we're going to be talking about is the benefits of cross generational collaboration, how to adapt your communication, and lastly, but the most importantly, how to foster knowledge sharing and mutual respect across the different age groups. Let's dive in. Let's start with the big picture, Raymond. Why does leading across generations matter more than ever now?
So that's amazing. That's a really good question. I think one of the things, number one, we need to understand is first of all, we are working across five generations. Okay, that's the first thing. I think the second thing we need to also understand, the more mature generation, the boomers, are working longer than what they are expected to. And I think the third thing we need to understand is the fact that the Gen Zs by 2030, most of our workforce will be 75% Gen Zs, right? So if you look at those three factors and we keep that in perspective, a couple of things that you need to know. The boomers basically have got deep institutional knowledge. So they understand how the organizations operate. The Gen Xers are independent and really, really efficient in how they go about doing things. The millennials push for purpose and also flexibility. And last but not least, the Gen Zs, as you're aware of, they are highly tech savvy, and they have got lots of fresh ideas. Already exposed to so many different things. So bringing all of this together in an organization would just make that department or the organization much more magical in what they're trying to do.
I love that you're framing the diversity as a strength because most oftentimes they are talked about as more of an issue.
So it's not really the fact that looking at them or expecting people to be the same, right? And it's in the human brain that we want things to be the same, that, they want certainty. But I think the ability for a leader to bring in that diversity in all the different generations that they are working with is going to be really impactful for what they're trying to accomplish.
I get what you mean. And of course, when leaders don't adapt, it can lead to misunderstandings or even conflict at times.
And the way I look at it, basically, it unlocks a couple of things. It unlocks collaboration, it unlocks innovation, it unlocks growth across all levels itself. So cross generational leadership isn't just about being inclusive, but it's also about being strategic, forward looking.
So let's talk collaboration. What does it actually look like to build trust and cooperation between team members who could be maybe decades apart?
I think one effective strategy is being able to put people who are of diverse generation together so that they could work together, right? I think one classical examples that we work on here at Enable is how you create content on Canva. All right, and that is one way to actually create high quality content for our clients. I've learned to use Canva a lot more in my presentation, creating new content. And at the same time, I think there is also communication that happens between us. Communication may help you to become better in terms of how to communicate. While for me, I learned how to use technology or infuse technology a little bit more into my work itself.
Right. And I believe it's really powerful because it also kind of breaks down that stereotypes that we might have about the different generations. And it shows that everyone has something to offer no matter their experience or age.
And I think you bring up a really good point. It's not just about transferring knowledge, all right, but it's also about how we are co-creating knowledge, how we are curating knowledge, how we are working together so that we get something done in the best possible way for the organization itself. So leaders should actively, create these opportunities. opportunities where people could actually come together, they could work together, such that they can create new things for the organization. So it's about creating that opportunities. It's about creating that dots for people to work together and discover each other a little bit more.
Let's shift gears to communication. I know this is one area where a lot of leaders struggle in. So, how do you communicate effectively across the different generations?
That's a really good question. In communicating across generation, it always ends up that there's some level of misunderstanding or miscommunication that comes across, and this could also be associated with the fact that there are norms and there are expectations. Norms typically how an individual has been brought up to communicate, and could be established by the social circles that they are in, professional circles, or even family circles. Then again, there's an element of expectation. How do I expect you to communicate? And that may be a little bit more confined to the different groups itself. So when there is a misalignment between norms and expectation, it ends up that there could be misunderstandings between individuals. I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, boomers prefer to communicate maybe through emails, formal emails, informal emails. So Gen X's tend to look for quick and no fluff way of communication. Straight to the point. Millennials tend to lean more towards maybe Slack and WhatsApp. Okay. While Gen Zs, they prefer to communicate in terms of memes and emojis and even voice notes.
So, if I want to reach everybody, I need to be a chameleon.
And that's a great point. In a way, yes. Okay. But again, one way to overcome that, I feel, is to also spend time to understand how someone wants to be communicated with. Right. So I think it's important for us to invest the time in asking how would they like to be communicated with. And in that way, when we do that, we are able to align ourselves to more effective communications with that specific individual. So it's always important for us to be intentional in our communication, right?
That makes so much sense. And I love that you mentioned avoiding assumptions because not every Gen Z is good to TikTok and not every boomer avoids tech.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, I've got this golden rule about communication. You don't communicate with people the way that I want to communicate, but you communicate with people based on how they want to be communicated with.
Okay, Raymond, let's get practical.
Mm.
So, how can a leader start building a culture that bridges the generation?
Amazing question. There could be a four-step way of how we could approach this. The first thing is always listen before leading. Right? I think we don't listen enough. I mentioned earlier, we make a lot of assumptions. So I think listening is something that would help us to understand what is it that motivates the other individual. The second one is also map out our minds. One of the tools that we use here actively is imagenetics. All right. Imagenetics it's a science based method of trying to capture in terms of what our preferences are. So use those tools to try to understand what our preferences for the other individual. The other thing is to facilitate two-way conversations, right? Ask questions. Listen to what the person's saying, follow through with further questions itself. And last but not least, tailor the communication. Tailor the communication to how the other person wants to communicate, right? Because that would help to actually bridge that process, bridge that relationship between two individuals, and ultimately make your conversation or make that relationship much better and easier to work with.
So it sounds like you're talking about making space for different ways of thinking, communicating, and showing up.
Yes. And that's because generational diversity is not only powerful, but we make room for each other, right? We build that relationship intentionally, and we are able to grow together as a team.
Final thoughts.
Just this, working and leading across generations can deepen connection. I believe when leaders embrace diversity in age, thought, and experience, they create teams that are more adaptable, they are more resilient, and innovative.
And if there's one thing I'm walking away with today, it's this: generational diversity is not a problem to solve, it's a superpower to harness. So, for those of you listening, here's a challenge for you. This week, take one action, whether it's asking your team how they prefer to communicate, pairing two people up from different age groups, or even just giving a shout out to someone whose contribution might get overlooked. So let's lead with curiosity and not assumptions.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on the next Leadership Bite. Until then, lead with courage and intention.